Okay. Good morning, everybody. You're probably wondering why it is 2 in the morning. Let's just say that, when you have a family and, you got, life, it's a little difficult to go out and do things like this. And specifically because, this week, I'll be even more busy. And so I wanted to do this at least before the All Saints evening and All Saints Day actually occurs. Now, listen, this will not be a waste of your time. Um, as you all know, I am a stickler for sources, being a sourceman, and so I'm gonna go ahead and get right into this. Um, I have, you know what? I meant to actually leave the sources for this in the description section. I'm not sure if I did that. Okay, yes, I did. Yes, I did. Okay. Um, Basically, what I'm going to be reading here is, and like I said, there are sources within this. What I'm going to be reading here is, oh, and by the way, if you guys think I'm going to be interacting with a Q&A in the question in like the comment section or something like that, unfortunately, I can't do that only because I only have enough time to go ahead and go through this. And from there, I have to go ahead and get up at work and be at work at 5 a.m. And right now it's 2 a.m. But I will promise you that I will do a follow-up Q&A for anyone who has any questions in the chat or who wants to actually come on and ask me some questions. I do not mind at all. I have a YouTube channel called So Real, SSOREAL, and it deals with a ton of stuff. Now, I'm going to go ahead and get into this. This comes from an old source that I love to use, and ironically, it is called History for Atheists. Yeah, you heard me correct. History for Atheists. If you look in the About Me section of this site, the guy says he's an atheist himself. So I just wanted to say that I try to use very unbiased sources. So with that being said, I'm just going to go ahead and begin. And by the way, I did end up, uh, only I did end up leaving out much of the parts of this that pretty much it seemed like the fat in the read, so that way it wouldn't be too long. Um, so yeah, I did want to say that as well. I also split it up into chapters just to make it easier for people to follow along. Okay. Now, before I get into this, again, I just did want to say that the notion of Halloween being pagan is of recent origin. That is my position after all my research that I've done. This is the only read I'll be sharing today. Besides me going to multiple places to find this stuff out myself, I see that this is the one site that pretty much has put all the stuff I've researched together, which is the reason why I'll be reading it here. With that being said, let's just go ahead and begin. It simply says here, is Halloween pagan or is Halloween pagan? I think it's kind of funny that he kind of did that there. And it simply says here, the idea that all traditional holidays and festivals of the year are pagan in origin were simply stolen by the church is one that has permeated popular culture and is repeated without question in newspaper, magazine, and online articles. And it is perhaps not surprising that harried journalists and underpaid online content writers are uncritical about these claims. It is more strange that the prominent atheists are as well, given that they are meant to be skeptics who check their facts and question everything. Unfortunately, many anti atheistic polemicists cannot resist a chance to get in a jab at any aspect of Christianity being, quote, really pagan. So every October, we see supposed rationalists parroting pseudo-history about, quote, the pagan origins of Halloween, with no sign of any fact-checking, let alone engagement with scholarship. In fact, the claim that Halloween is pagan is largely a 19th century myth. It is hardly surprising, then, therefore, that the most obviously pagan seeing festival of the year, Halloween, is also presented as a wholly pagan enterprise, which had once again been stolen by Christians and given a superficial makeover. After all, what could a festival that focuses on spirits and spooks, demons, and the dark and tricks and pranks have to do with Christianity? All those supernatural elements, spooky costumes, and tricking and treating must have surely have been a pre-Christian origin. So every October, we see a plethora of articles like, what is the real history of Halloween? Why do we celebrate it on October 31st? Or the pagan origins of Halloween, telling us the same thing. Halloween may be the evening of All Saints' Day, but it falls on this date because it was originally the pagan Celtic festival of Samhain. We're going to be getting into Samhain a lot. I'm just setting up the common things that people say. So again, we're going to just compare what people say to what history actually records. All right. Samhain and all the spooky associations that has come from this pagan festival of the dead. Trick or treating, jack-o'-lanterns, dressing up in costumes associated with the supernatural. All these things we are assured, are pagan in origin and date back to pre-Christian times. This is their claim. So the atheists, neo-pagans, and evangelical Christians are all oddly in complete agreement, unfortunately. Halloween is pagan in origin, and both the date and the traditions around it derive from a Druidic cultic festival. That's another thing that we'll be, seeing if it's true or not. This strange consensus is made even more ironic by the fact that these ideas are almost entirely wrong. The Christian origin of Halloween. First off, let's just go ahead and look at the name. Is the name Halloween pagan in origin? It's the first thing we'll see that it's not. It says the name Halloween or Halloween is a traditional contracted form of All Hallows Eve. This in turn is a reference to the Feast of All Saints' Day, traditionally called All Hallows Day, or simply All Hallows, or sometimes Hallowmas in English. In the Catholic liturgical year of All Saints' Day falls on November 1st each year, and as a first-ranked feast day, was always celebrated with a vigil, and then later with an octave. This means that it was not only celebrated on the day itself, but also, like Easter Sunday and Christmas Day, with preparatory prayers and a mass or liturgy the night before. The octave, an extended 8-day sequence of liturgy following the feast day, was added by Pope Sixtus IV in 1480. Though it was removed in the 20th century, the vigil held the evening before, however, seems as old as the feast itself. So Halloween refers to this vigil as its associated traditions, at least for, the name and things. All Saints' Day, as the name would suggest, is a commemoration held in several Christian denominations of all those who deceased believers who have attained. In the Western tradition, it is followed by All Souls' Day on November 2nd, for remembrance of the dead generally. The veneration, notice it said veneration, it didn't say worship. There's a difference between the two, and that's for a whole nother video. The veneration of the triumphant dead, right? The victorious dead, hail the victorious dead, is a very old tradition in Christianity and seems to have its origin in its cult of martyrs in the first centuries of the religion's history. Annual commemoration of martyred Christians appears in the sources very early on with the martyrdom of Polycarp. He lived from, AD 150 to 200, referring to this practice. Now, I believe this is a quote, and it says here, accordingly, and by the way, we're going to be getting into dates pretty soon. Accordingly, we afterwards took up his bones as being more precious than the most exquisite jewels and more purified than gold, and deposited them in a fitting place, whither, being gathered together, as opportunity is allowed us. With joy and rejoicing, the Lord shall grant to us to celebrate the anniversary of his martyrdom, both in memory of those who have already finished their course, and for the exercising and preparation of those yet to thank their steps. So you can already see that when it comes to Polycarp, what they did basically, they gathered, his remains, and they kept them as basically as holy relics. Now remember, Polycarp lived from about, 80, 150 to 200. So you're already seeing this type of thing go on in the early second century. And by the way, relics go back as far as the Old Testament itself, right? The interaction with, objects that are blessed with the holy power of God. Chapter 1. Check the dates. This is the first thing I want everyone to see when it comes to, Halloween being a pagan origin. Looking at Samhain. Check the dates. The same text places Polycarp's death and therefore this commemorative day, guess what? On April 25th. Now, why is April 25th going to be important? Just find out. For right now, I want you to keep that date in mind. April 25th. All right? Just keep that date in mind. Though the exact year is not certain, from the 4th century onward, we find references to annual commemorations of all martyrs, first known as All Martyrs' Day. So, when it comes to All Saints' Day, that means at first it was known as All Martyrs' Day. You could already see that their inspiration for martyrs came from the fact that, the Christians were being martyred. So, just the name itself has a Christian origin already. It was once called All Martyrs' Day. Has nothing to do with paganism. Has everything to do with people dying for their faith. Let's keep going. And saints on various days depending on location. So the Orthodox tradition celebrated all saints on the Sunday after Pentecost, as it still does, while the Syrian tradition held it on the Friday after Easter. Gregory Thaumaturgus, the wonder worker, writing before the year 270, refers to the observance of a festival of all martyrs. There it is again, a festival of all martyrs, though he does not give a date. But we already seen some dates already pop up. A century later, Ephraim the Deacon, in 373 AD, notes such an observance in Edessa, Turkey, on the 13th of May. And by the way, these are coming from, my notes that I've found with other sources online. So this is not just from History from Atheists. There's other things in there that I also put in there as well. And I'm reading now. Now here's another one. And John Chrysostom, Bishop of Constantinople, in 407 AD, writes that a festival, by the way, he died in 407, writes that a festival of all saints was observed on the first Sunday after Pentecost in Constantinople at the time of his episcopate. In other words, at the time that he was bishop, which remains the feast of all saints in the Orthodox churches to this day. In the West, A commemoration of All Saints became established with the rededication of the Pantheon at Rome. Now you can check this out for yourself. Basically, the Christians got rid of all the old gods in that pantheon, and it was replaced by Christ and his saints. Originally a pagan temple dedicated to all the gods, as a Christian church under the name Sancta Maria and Martyrs, Saint Mary and all the martyrs, by Pope Boniface IV on the 13th of May in the year 610. Now, in Ireland and England, this is our main focus, right? Again, this is our main focus because this is where the claims come from. That it all spread to Ireland. It started in Ireland, and from there it spread as an influence. So we're going to see what history says. In Ireland and England, the focus of the day was slightly different. Some manuscripts of the martyrology of Oengus, the Cody, and that's the early 9th century, a manuscript that speaks of the end of paganism and the rise of monasticism. So this is what this manuscript is about, right? And you could already see that the title of this manuscript is called The Martyrology of Oengus the Cody, right? In other words, this is a guy who wrote about the deaths, the victorious deaths of Christians who were killed for their faith. 9th century. Notes that a commemoration of all martyrs on the 17th of April. Remember I told you guys about April? Remember? So here it is in Ireland and England that they are celebrating the death of the saints by martyrdom in April. Not October 31st, not November 1st, right? The very date that people claim that, this is when Samhain was celebrated because, the dead are close to these days. Okay, so now all of a sudden we have this 9th century document that's saying that these Irish Christians are celebrating, All Saints Day on April, in April. That's a problem. All right. And once again, that's a 9th century manuscript. Primary source, Ireland. This puts an end to the Catholic Druid Samhain connection to All Saints' Day due to the distance of dates. Let's go ahead and continue. The metrical English calendar, 10th century, probably from Winchester, also includes the latter commemoration. However, from about the year 800, the 1st of November gained in popularity as a commemoration of All Saints. So the feast day was moved from May to November to take advantage of the abundance of food from the harvest season, because thousands of the faithful migrating to Rome and Jerusalem during May resulted in hungry people during those days. So yeah, if I was a pope and I realized this, I would move it to a time when food is most abundant as well. It makes perfect sense. That goes against any notion that the Roman Catholic Church or any of the early churches were trying to go ahead and move in on pagan holidays or Christianizing. It goes totally against that narrative. You see, this is the difference between what history is showing and why people are doing what they're doing versus what people are touting out as pagan claims. You see that contrast? That's an issue. Let me go ahead and continue. Alcuin, I believe he died in 804, mentions the date in the letter of that year, and manuscripts of the Martyrology of Bede. Okay, so this is a second martyrology. It seems that Christians definitely do like writing about, how faithful Christians have died for the faith. It seems like they really like writing about this stuff. So this is a second source that we've seen already, and it's called the Martyrology of Bede. So this is Bede's martyrology. He has it as a marginal addition at about the same time. Arno, Bishop of Salzburg, died in 821, had adopted it, had it adopted by a synod in the year 798. So you can see that we're tracking when these times were celebrated and who died. So we got April and we got November. And we had people tracking and copying this stuff and adding, the people who they know who died back then. This is what we have from the sources. Oop, let me go back. Sorry about that. The date of the 1st of November is probably based on the dedication of a chapel in St. Peter's, Rome, for the relics, quote, of the holy apostles and of all the saints, martyrs, and confessors of all the just made perfect who are at rest throughout the world by Pope Gregory III in 741. A November commemoration of All Saints was already widespread in Frankish lands during Charlemagne's reign in 814. I do believe the Frankish lands they're talking about is Gaul, and Gaul would be, old France during that time. Pope Gregory IV, under the Gallican influence, ordered the observance of the 1st of November as a feast of all saints. By the early 9th century, an English calendar of Oxford ranks the day as a principal feast. There were over 1,200 ancient church dedications to all saints in England, a number surpassed only by the dedication to Saint Mary the Virgin. Remember, we're still on chapter 1 called Check the Dates. On the 13th of May in 609 AD, or perhaps 610 AD, Pope Boniface IV consecrated the Pantheon in Rome as a Catholic tradition dedicated to all saints and ordered an annual celebration of the saints in that church on this date, which is held to this day. At some point, this his pontificate, and I think his pope, how long he was pope, from 731 to 741 AD. Pope Gregory III dedicated a chapel in St. Peter's to all saints and martyrs, and some accounts say this was on November 1st, making this the potential origin of the Western date for the All Saints' Day. Sometime later in the 8th century, the Martyrologium Poeticum, a poetic calendar of saints' days and other feast days celebrated at York. Now, just one moment, y'all. Once again, I apologize. I will be right back. Okay? Wife is calling. I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. I really do apologize about that. Um, yes, so basically, to let you guys know, because I do get permission. Um, my wife, as of technically it's now yesterday, right? She's had a successful surgery, so I kind of got to be a doctor husband. So if you see me pop in and out here and there, that's why. All right. So I'm very glad about that. Um, okay. So I'm going to go ahead and continue this. So what we have here is, let's see where I left off. Okay, here it is. A poetic calendar of saints and other feast days, right? So you basically get to see that they do celebrate different saints on different days, and that's where you have their feast days. Celebrated at York makes a clear reference to a feast of all saints on November 1st. Now, I'm not going to go ahead and read this next part, which is in Latin. It says multiplici ruliet gemma su in fronte. Basically, it says, as a jewel worn on the brow sparkles from time and again, so November at its beginning is resplendent with the praise given to all the saints. So again, this comes from that calendar. Given this was a practice at York, and once again, I do believe that York is in England, right, where a lot of the Celts are. Given that this practice was at York, it is not surprising to find the great scholar Alcuin of York, 732 to 804 AD, writing to his friend Arno, Bishop of Salzburg, urging him to celebrate All Saints' Day on November 1st. And again, we already covered why they decided to go ahead and move the date. I already covered it, but I'm going ahead and showing you a quote here. Let's see. Of course, it starts off in Latin, but I'm going to read the English here. It says here, on the calends of November is the solemnity of all the saints. See, Venerable Father Arno, you have marked the solemnity of all the saints, just as we said. Keep that ever in mind and never cease to celebrate it on that annual date. Alcuin, letter 193, AD 800. This urging suggests that All Saints' Day was perhaps celebrated on other dates, and Alcuin, by this stage, back at the court of the Frankish ruler Charlemagne at Aachen, preferred the tradition he knew from England. Or it could be that he is urging the importance of at least, of the feast rather than the date of the celebration per se. What we do know is a November 1st date caught on in Francia with Pope Gregory IV promulgating it as the saints. Okay. All right. Promulgating it as the date of All Saints' Day for both East and West Francia. And this was reinforced by an edict by Louis the Pious in 835 AD, as recorded in the entry for that year in the Chronicon of Sigebert of Gambleaux. So that's another date, or that's another source where they're actually getting this from. With the date established across the Frankish Empire, it became more widely adopted and over the next 2 centuries became standard Catholic liturgical practice across Europe. So let me get this straight. The April 25th practice that we found was in Ireland, right? And if I didn't get to that, then that's basically I'm giving you a spoiler for what's ahead. But the April 25th date was found in Ireland. And of course, the date for May was found in Rome and Jerusalem, places like that. The date for it changing was by the popes, because I already told you before that, during that time, there was not much food to feed all these people that were migrating there to celebrate it. And so they moved it to the harvest time where plenty of food would be for the time, so that way people could go and eat when they all came here. And they moved it to November, which is the time that, you had the harvest back then. That caught on. And the main place it seemed to catch on was in, the Frankish area, to the point where it caught on in England, which is not far from, Celtic Ireland. So you can see where the influence is coming from. You think it would have came from the area that where all the Druids were in Ireland. You think it would have came this way as an influence for the dating. But according to history, as we can see, the influence came from down up, right? From Rome and Jerusalem and Greece and all down there. It went the influence of the date change went up. So once again, that's an issue. Chapter 2. Samhain is missing. This is mainly the main part I know that a lot of people have been waiting for. What is obviously missing from all this is any hint of any influence by anything pagan, let alone some Irish or Celtic festival presided over by the Druids. That's what's missing. Even if the dedication of the chapel in St. Peter's by Gregory III was not the origin of the November date, and the practice arose independently in England and spread to Francia via influence of English scholars like Alcuin, there is a serious problem with the idea that this was due to Irish Celtic influence on England. This is because the earliest Irish reference to an All Saints' Day does not have it celebrated there on November 1st, but on April 20th. April 20th. Not November 1st. April 20th. That's something to think about. So that's an issue. The Filire Oenguso, or martyrology of Oengus, is another martyrology. And this is, again, that's a source attributed to Saint Oengus of Talat. It seems to date to the 9th century and is based on an earlier English martyrologies like that of Bede. So this is one martyrology that's, likely from another earlier martyrology. And again, a martyrology is when a saint or a monk writes down all the saints and Christians that were martyred, killed for their faith. They got a whole list. That's what that means. So you got two sources here, but with significant local Irish additions. In other words, whoever wrote this one added in some saints that died in Ireland in his local area. It mentions a Feast of All Saints, and its listing is for April 20th. See, this is a part where we're supposed to find some kind of November 1st celebration due to them trying to adapt from Samhain and all that. But once again, we don't find that, do we? That's an issue. April 20th. This is what we find when we dig up the stuff. Ireland, 9th century. Day of the suffering of, of Herodias, priest who crucified Desire, feast in Rome, that noble town of the whole of the saints of Europe. Under November 1st, on the other hand, we do find finally a reference to Samhain. First reference to Samhain. Let's see what it is. But it is not associated with commemorating all saints, but rather with 3 Irish saints only. So now this guy, this person, or these group of people in Ireland who are coming together to celebrate the Feast of All Saints are only celebrating 3 Irish saints in their area. Unlike everybody else who's just celebrating everybody. And yet, this is a reference to Samhain. It says here, Lonan, Coleman, Cronin, with their bright sunny flowers, the host of Hilary, many sure and noble, stormy Samhain. So while the English were already celebrating All Saints' Day on November 1st in the 8th century, and that date became predominant in Francia by the mid-9th century, the Irish were doing so on April 20th. That's an issue. With quote-unquote Stormy Samhain, the feast of 3 local holy men only. As esteemed historian folklore Ronald Hutton summarizes in his quote Stations of the Sun, Oxford 1996, quote, Charlemagne's favorite churchman Alcuin was keeping it by 800, as were also his friends Arno, Bishop of Salzburg, and a church in Bavaria. Pope Gregory IV, therefore, was endorsing and adopting a practice which had begun in Northern Europe. It had not, however, started in Ireland, where the Filiere of Onengus and the Martyrology of Talat proved that the early medieval churches celebrated the Feast of All Saints upon the 20th of April. This makes nonsense of the notion that the November date was chosen because of Celtic influence. Chapter 35. That's an issue. Hutton favors a Germanic origin of the date, either the practice of the English church which influenced Francia, or perhaps the other way around. Or it could be that the Roman celebration on that day derived from Gregory III spread to both. But since the Irish in the same period seem to have used April 20th for their date and paid little regard to November 1st at this stage, the claim the whole thing being in Ireland as an originally pagan festival makes no sense. And so therefore, this is an issue. This is chapter 3 I have. Samhain, scarce in the sources. The claims about the origins of Halloween lying in Samhain tend to be very detailed about this Celtic festival, with reference to all the key elements of it that thus made their way into Halloween traditions: trick-or-treating, jack-o'-lanterns, dressing up costumes and masks as a general association with the dead. But when we turn to what we know about this pre-Christian feast day, we find few to none of these elements. And when we do, we find that they're Christian in origin, right? This is the Coligny calendar, 1st century BC, 100 years before Christ. There is certainly some evidence that November 1st was a key date for several cultures across the Celtic language group, marking the end of summer. The Irish word Samhain, also found as Samain, Samhain, but is pronounced Samhain, seems to derive from the ancient word meaning summer. A key piece of evidence here is the Coligny calendar. This is a source. An inscribed bronze tablet discovered in southeast France in 1897. This represents the lunisolar calendar, so it's half lunar and half solar. And by the way, I did my research to see what kind of calendar that the Druids had used. They strictly used a lunar calendar. They didn't use a lunisolar calendar at all. So whatever calendar that the Druids were using, it was a totally different calendar. And yet this dual calendar still speaks of Samhain. So let's see what it says. Which reconciles moon phases with the solar year over a cycle of 5 years via the insertion of an occasional intercalary leap month, and it dates to the 1st century BC. The inscriptions on the calendar use Roman script and numerals, but the names of the month on it are in the Celtic language of the ancient Gauls. These include a month called, just a second, this includes a month called Samonios, At the beginning of the year, derived from the Gallic root samo, meaning summer. This is almost certainly a cognate with the Irish Samhain, but Salmonios began in May and did not fall in November, called Geomonios on the Caligni calendar. This means Samhain is a compound word, something that means like summer's end. So it's pretty interesting here that, we got some things going on here. It is a cognate with the word Samhain, but Salmonios began in May and did not fall in November, right? November was known as Gaiamonios, but yet it's a combination of this kind of words here. So we got May and we got November. What do we know about May? About what we were researching earlier. We know that in May, in the South, in Rome and Jerusalem and all those places down there, that was when the Feast of All Martyrs Day, which was later called All Saints Day, was first celebrated in May. We know why it was moved to November. I'm not going to say it for a 19th time. But yet, right here, we have, Samhain, which is supposed to be associated with November only, but for some reason it's so associated with May as well. So it seems like this is kind of like a quarterly celebration, which once again, this is not how Samhain is spoken about in modern times today. It's not spoken like that. But yet it's right here. That's an issue. So now we can't peg it to just one day out the year. That's an issue. So it really begins to question, what was Samhain in the first place? If it wasn't celebrated on the time where, supposedly spirits were closest to the earth. Well, what was it in the first place then? Now, I've did my research and I found out that, most people say that it was really just another quarterly festival year, whether it's in the spring and, we're going to get things started, and then all of a sudden it's fall time where we got things finished. So it seems to be like a seasonal kind of holiday there. All right, let's continue. As already mentioned, the 9th century Felier or Anguso refers to November 1st as Stormy Samhain, right? That's my earlier source. And the early 9th century Welsh text, the Law of Hywel Dda, repeatedly uses, quote, the calends of winter, i.e., November 1st, as a key annual demarcation for various laws, again indicating the end of summer on this day as an important date. What we do not find in early references to either Samhain or the calendrical significance of November 1st as the end of summer is a reference to rituals or religious practices. Seems like we don't find that there. So we find some dates, but we don't find any religious reasons at all. The early Irish glossary Sanas Cormaic, once again, this is another source, which dates to the 10th century, is a word list with etymologies and explanations of over 1,400 words, and it mentions the spring festival of Beltane on May 1st. Beltane is a month, which is May in Irish, and refers to Druids giving cattle between two ritual fires to protect them from the coming year on that date, but does not mention Samhain at all. That's an issue, let alone any rituals associated with it. The Ulster cycle epics, once again, this is another source, possibly dating to the 10th century or earlier, make a couple of mentions of Samhain. Oh, okay. Talmark and Meyer, the wooing of Emer, lists Samhain as one of the year's quarter days, along with, I believe that's Lubbock, February 1st, Beltane, that's May, and Lugnazad, and that's August, and Serglij, Con Kulanin, and that's the sickbed of Kulanin, gives us some more important details about marking Samhain may have traditionally entailed. So we got some sources here that may speak about, this thing that will work up about Samhain. These three sources here. Every year, the men of Ulster, and this comes from, A.H. Leary, Heroic Romances of Ireland, Volume 1, London, 1905, page 57. It says, quote, every year the men of Ulster were accustomed to hold festivals together. At the time when they held it was for 3 days before Samhain, the summer's end, and for 3 days after that day, and upon Samhain itself. At the time it was spoken of as that when the men of Ulster were in the plain of Mirthenmy, and there they began to keep that festival every year, nor was there a thing in the world that they would do at the time except sports and marketings and splendors and pomps and feasting and eating. And it is from that custom of theirs that the festival of the Samhain had descended, that is now held throughout the whole of Ireland. I thought I was supposed to go ahead and find that Samhain, they were doing all this ritual druid stuff. It seems like people are basically doing sports and eating and drinking and doing all this splendorous stuff, mainly because this is a time where you have lots and lots and lots of food, because now you're in fall time harvest season. And it seems that the way that they celebrate it is equivalent to how we celebrate football season. But when you read it, you shouldn't be surprised, because if you have a whole surplus of food, why wouldn't you celebrate it that way? I mean, now you got more than enough energy due to the food to go ahead and have sports and, compete for more food or whatever. This is what we actually find. Here, we get a lot of feasting and splendorous and pomps, but no rituals or any indication of overtly religious significance. It seems more of a chance to get together and have a good time before the weather turns too wintry. It is not until the 12th century of MacNamartha Finn, the boyhood deeds of Finn Mac Cumhale, that we find something supernatural associated with the reference to Samhain. Now, this comes from, quote, Tom P. Cross and Clark Harris Slover, Ancient Irish Tales, New York, 1936. It says, quote, however, Finn went to Gethern, the son of Fintan, further to learn poetry with him. At that time there was a very beautiful maiden in Brie Eli, that is to say, in the fairy knoll of Brie Eli, and the name of that maiden was Eli. The men of Ireland were at feud about that maiden, and one man after another went to woo her. Every year on Samhain, the wooing used to take place, for the fairy mounds of Ireland were always open about Samhain. For on Samhain, nothing could ever be hidden in the fairy mounds. To each man that went to her went to woo her, is used to happen one of his people was slain. This was done to mark the occasion, nor was ever found out who did it. So now we, find something at least a little supernatural about Samhain. You got these guys that like this girl. They all compete with her, but during the time of Samhain, anytime they make a venture in the forest to get there or whatever, somehow they mysteriously die and they don't know who did it. This is during the 12th century that we're getting our first reference to something supernatural about Samhain. Samhain is late on the scene, and when it comes on the scene, it's barely got anything religious or ritual or pagan or sacrifice. We got something supernatural, but that's about it. 12th century. Compare that to the 10th century and the 9th century and the 8th century and the 4th century of all this Christian stuff going on. And you find Christian stuff going on in Ireland in April and not even November. And yet we're supposed to compare it to what we find here in the 12th century, and it's got, at least it's crossing into something supernatural. But once again, that doesn't cut it. Again, this is an issue. So the idea that the world of the Seedhi, the fairy folk of Irish legend, is open to a mundane world at certain times of year is also found associated with Beltane. Now, last time I checked, we just saw how the word Beltane is associated with a month meaning May. This is getting bad. I thought the supernatural stuff was supposed to happen during November, not May, not any time of year. This is not good for the pagan claim. But even here, we do not find any indication of ritual or religious observance. Perhaps the closest we get to that is the Dind Shen Chas, the lore of places, also from the 12th century, which tells a story of St. Patrick throwing down an idol of the pagan god Crom Craich at Mag Slecht, the plane of prostration. Prostration. That's like a form of veneration, I believe. The Dind Shen Chas says, quote, the firstlings of every issue and the chief of Seons of every clan were sacrificed to this idol. So it also details how each year at Samhain, the High King would lead the people in prostrating themselves before the idol of Crom Quaich, and how they would fling themselves on the ground so violently that 3/4 of them died each time. So far, we just got during Samhain how this god was adored and worshipped by guys throwing themselves on the ground over and over until 1/3 of them died from doing it. Other later versions of how Patrick ended the worship of this god. So in other words, this is temporary. So much for the ongoing tradition and ritual. Thanks to St. Patrick, ironically, of Ireland. Versions of how St. Patrick ended the worship of this god also mention sacrifices of children to his idol, but make no mention of Samhain. That's an issue. There were sacrifices went around throughout the whole time of the year in many places. And yet here we don't find any mention of Samhain. Hutton is skeptical of whether these stories reflect anything historical, and concludes, quote, the Mag Slecht story sounds like a medieval Christian fantasy developing over time and growing more lurid with each retelling. Hutton, Blood and Mistletoe, The History of the Druids in Britain, Yale, 2009, page 41. It should be noted here that even in these stories, the references to child sacrifices to this idol are not associated with Samhain. It's not looking good. All this means that despite some rather strained attempts to make these and other references conform to the idea of Samhain and as some ancient Irish festivals of the dead, we really do not have any clear evidence of Samhain as a religious festival at all, and we definitely do not have so much as a hint of an alleged pagan practices that are the origin of modern Halloween traditions of trick-or-treating, jack-o'-lanterns, etc. So what is the origin of the claims of these things coming from when it comes to Samhain? That's a good question. Chapter 4, the late rise of the modern myth. This is what I call it. The late rise of the modern myth. The earliest reference to Samhain as a time of ritual, sacrifice, and druidic ceremony comes in 1634. Now, why is that a problem? That's a problem because now you are in the hotbed of the time of the Protestant Reformation. See, all these manuscripts and early evidence and all that, it was supposed to come way before this. It wasn't supposed to come during the time when, you had the Protestant sola scriptura, scripture only people, and they're hyper skeptical and also ignorant a lot of the Roman Catholic traditions and things like that, and they automatically assume everything's pagan. No, now they just sound like the modern myth people. See, that's the issue. 1634, it's too late by then. Yeah, almost what? You got a few people saying what people say today. That's an issue. And we know why they're saying it, right? Because they don't like, they're trying to get away from the Roman Catholic Church. Look up the Puritans. They do this stuff all the time. They try to purify Rome of its popery. And a lot of political accounts about that stuff. Anyway, comes in 1634 in an account by Cthrune Keating, or Geoffrey Keating, right? That'll be his English name, Geoffrey Keating, 1634, a priest, poet, and antiquarian from Tipperary, who Hutton describes as, quote, the thoroughly unreliable 17th century Irish antiquary. That's how Hutton looks at this guy. Keating's account mingles a few elements from the medieval sources with a lot of lurid fantasy. This comes from, Keating himself, and it is Forus Fesa or Erin, The History of Ireland, Book 1, and I believe that's 10, 20, 30, probably book 40. I guess that's what that says. Book 40, book 39, 40. It says, quote, it was there the fire of Talaka was instituted, at which it was their custom to assemble and bring together the Druids of Ireland on the eve of Samhain to offer sacrifice to all the gods. It was at that fire they used to burn their victims. It was of obligation under penalty of fine to quench the fires of Ireland on that night. And the men of Ireland were forbidden to kindle fires except from that fire. And for each fire that was kindled from it in Ireland, the king of Munster received a tax of a squeal, or 3 pence, since the land of which Talaka belongs to the part of Munster given to Meath. So we can see where this Johnny come lately type of myth came from. Like Hutton, all other modern scholars reject this account as largely lurid fantasy on Keating's part, cobbled together out of references to fire rituals associated with other times of year, with a heavy layer of Keating's imagination. Now, we just got done showing how Samhain was kind of celebrated like here and there. And yet this reference here says that, the fires are also, something that was done here and there, not just on Samhain, which is, I guess, the reason why Hutton kind of looks at this 17th century guy as a little leery, a little exaggerated, which makes sense historically. Now it says, see Benchi, D.A., the Fair of Talitu, and the Feast of Tara, Irayu, 1958, 113 to 38, specifically on page 129 and 130. Unfortunately, As of the few early and seemingly scholarly books on the early Ireland, Keating's work was highly influential on later claims about Halloween's pagan origins. So this seems to be the fall guy. This seems to be the guy that touted all this stuff. But you could already see that a lot of modern scholars are looking at his stuff and they're finding whatever he's trying to peg on November 1st. They're finding it in like multiple places throughout the times and seasons of Ireland, which is the reason why they think that he kind of exaggerated by trying to keep it all in one date and one time. But yet, unfortunately, according to history here, this is a guy that gave the kickoff to this whole notion of Halloween being pagan. It seems to start from this guy right here. Let's see where this goes. Keating's work was highly influential on later claims about Halloween's pagan origins. Here we find the Druids and the human sacrifice found repeatedly in later claims about the pre-Christian Halloween, along with a garbled origin story of the traditions around the fires, which did feature as a part of many Halloween practices. Partially thanks to Keating, I almost want to say cheating because it's like they are cheating, right? Partially thanks to Keating, the association of the supposed rituals of the Druids as the origin of various traditional practices and ancient sites became the mainstay of antiquarian speculation from the 17th century to the early 18th century. With John Aubrey's Monumenta Britannica 1693, fixing the still persistent association of Druids and Stonehenge in the popular imagination. Protestant polemicists, who didn't make anything better, took this idea up to blame the Druids for all manner of residual Catholic traditions, which we just got done saying that all the Catholic stuff came from origins of the deaths of saints, celebrated on April 20th in Ireland. Do you see the issue here? Let me keep going because I don't want to preach yet because then I'll lose my place here. Blame the Druids for all manner of residual Catholic traditions, which they condemn just as, quote, popery, but trace to bloodthirsty pagan origins, a line of argument that also persists to this day and leads directly to fervid evangelical fantasies like the famous Jack T. Chick tracts noted earlier, right? Remember Jack Chick? Those Chick tracts you find, and then have all these cartoon stuff about, oh, you're going to hell or what heaven is like, right? During the 1980s, right? Well, yeah, it says it eventually it made it into those places too. So thank you, Mr. Keating. By the 19th century, better researchers began to examine the evidence more carefully, though the pagan origins idea established since Keating's time continued to be their key assumption. In 1886, the Welsh-born Oxford philologist Sir John Rhys argued on his lectures on the origin of the growth of religion, as illustrated by Celtic heathendom in 1886, that November 1st had been the Celtic New Year, largely based on Welsh folklore associating Halloween with new beginnings. This idea was greatly expanded by Sir James Frazer in his heavily influential The Golden Bough, a studied and expanded by Sir James Frazer in his heavily influential, I repeated myself, a study in comparative religion. Originally published in 2 volumes in 1890 and eventually expanded to 12 volumes in his 3rd edition, published in 1906 to 1915. Fraser's book caused something of a scandal for treating Christianity in like any other form of ancient mythology, but effectively established a discipline of comparative religion in the English-speaking world. It was and remains culturally significant in that it influenced everyone from Sigmund Freud to Joseph Campbell, and writers and artists from Robert Graves to Jim Morrison. This is despite the fact that modern scholars find much of Fraser's arguments unconvincing. That's an issue. For Fraser, Samhain had been nothing less than the pagan Celtic feast of the Dead. Like Rees, he saw it as marking the death of the old year and also as a nominous time when the supernatural was abroad. But he argued that it was common for many cultures to honor their dead at the close of the year, and so argued that the Christian feast of All Saints and All Souls on November 1st and 2nd had to have their origins in this posited earlier Celtic festival. Of course, this is based on an idea that All Saints began in Ireland and the Celtic tradition and transferred to the rest of Europe. Now, what's the problem? The problem is, I just got done showing y'all way early on in the beginning of this whole thing that it went from Rome and Jerusalem down there all the way up to the Frankish area and York and then and in Ireland. We just got done seeing that, during the beginning of this video here. But now you can see where this Johnny come lately claim is actually coming from. So you're seeing it for yourself. Late in the game. That's what I call it. Right. Let's see here. Of course, this is based on the idea that All Saints' Day began in Ireland and the Celtic tradition and transferred to the rest of Europe. But as discussed above, this does not seem to be the case, with the earlier Irish celebration of All Saints on April 20th. Remember we spoke about that earlier? Giving way to the date established in Francia in the 9th century to November 1st. Fraser got the influence completely the wrong way around. Yep, I definitely agree with that. But thanks to the influence of the Golden Bough on popular culture, the idea that there was a Celtic Day of the Dead was Day of the Dead as the origin of both the date of Halloween and its traditions involving ghosts and supernatural persists. This is mixed with the anti-papist claims in the Protestant tradition, mainly the Puritans, that links this supposed pagan origin to Druids and human sacrifice that also persists in some versions of the Halloween origin story. So, we are assured the practices of wearing costumes and masks, trick-or-treating, Halloween games, and jack-o'-lanterns are also firmly pagan. Chapter 5. All Saints versus all claims. The problem with the claim that the key traditions of Halloween are all pagan in origin is the same as that with such arguments. They assume that no new traditions could possibly have arisen in the centuries since the conversion of Christianity, and so all traditions which are old or seem old must be pre-Christian, therefore pagan. There are many unwarranted assumptions in this line of reasoning, but it seems to be widely accepted without much question. As it happens, the elements of Halloween which may be pre-Christian are actually not common today, and the most common practices today do not seem to be pre-Christian at all. I think I need to read that again. Let me read that last sentence to you again. As it happens, the elements of Halloween, which may be pre-Christian, are not actually common practice today. And the most common practice today do not seem to be pre-Christian at all. One of the most common elements in traditional Halloween folklore involves the lighting of fires. This seems to be a source of Geoffrey Keating's antiquarian fantasy about Druids burning people alive at Samhain. But fires that are watched as they burn over the course of the night at Halloween are found in traditions across Ireland, Scotland, and many parts of Wales. These Hallowmas fires discouraged in Protestant areas as a holdover from Catholic traditions, since watching the fire. You know what? What early practices were even done during the time of the Feast of All Martyrs and All Saints Day that had them burning fires? Christians who celebrated, the saints and those who died and became saints, we didn't find them burning no fires in April 20th. or in May or November 1st at all. Like, at all. At most, these people are probably in their churches, fasting, praying, partaking of the Eucharist, and finally partaking of a love feast or something like that. And of course, reading about the lives of those martyrs. Not no fires. But yet, this is what people are just presuming on the day because they see Irish people lighting fires throughout all times of the year. That's an issue, is it not? Let's go ahead and continue. Let's see. These Hallowmas fires were discouraged in Protestant areas as a holdover from Catholic traditions. Since watching the fire as it burned down while remembering the dead was part of the tradition in many parts, as was clearly connected to the Feast of All Saints and All Souls. But there are elements in these practices that could indicate a pre-Christian origin, such as the Scottish tradition that the fire is burned to keep the fairies away or to drive off witches. Doesn't sound like anything Christian to me there. The fire traditions are also associated with divination, which is another cluster of practices around Halloween that has largely died out. In North Wales, each person put a white pebble in the fire, and if any of them was missing from the ashes the next day, this was a sign that the person would die that year. Similar practices in Scotland would indicate a pre-Christian origin for these ideas, though there is no way of being sure of this. Other better known and still popular traditions do not seem to have pagan origins at all, despite persistent claims to the contrary. The lurid fantasies of druids carrying off people for human sacrifices, unless they are placated with gifts and food, are often alleged to be the origin of trick or treating. In fact, this seems to have its origin in a Christian practice. Since All Saints and All Souls were feasts focused on the afterlife, in the old Catholic tradition, there are also a time where charity was encouraged by the living to boost their chances of attaining heaven. Kind of sounds like they're talking about indulgences, right? We all know what indulgences are. It's when you go ahead and you pay the church or you do some kind of good deed or whatever, and all of a sudden it results in people spending less time in purgatory. That's it. Where is the pagan influence on that? Sounds like it had a bit of a political origin. Is this making sense? You know what I mean? We can't look back at all this stuff and say, oh, that looks pagan. That looks pagan. No. Why did they start it? Why did they start it? That's an issue. Let's see here. So distributing food to the poor was a central part of All Hallow Tide. Giving food to the poor. Oh, that sounds so pagan, doesn't it? That doesn't sound Christian-hearted at all. Giving food to the poor during All Hallow Tide. Yeah, that's clearly Christian. That's not a pagan thing to do. The 3-day period from Halloween to the end of All Souls, special soul cakes were traditionally baked to be given as charity to the poor, and other seasonal food such as nuts, apples, and berries, all abundant in early autumn, were also distributed. The church would at that time, lead processions. These are my words here, based on my research. Will lead processions of the statues of saints around the church to honor all the saints. Those who were poorer, who had no access to statues, would instead dress up as saints and will also march around the church. But they did not stop there. The poor often still dress up as saints, going from house to house to receive food and charity in exchange that they would pray for any loved one, no matter how much or little food, often soul cakes, they received. The prayers for the dead and to the saints as intercessions was already an early Christian practice to begin with. So if you want to know where dressing up came from, it was a Christian thing. Christians who were too poor to carry around statues around their church to go and honor the saints on that day, dress up as saints themselves. And then from there, they went from house to house saying, hey, you know what? If you can give me a soul cake, I'll pray for any soul that you request. Can you imagine that? The adults and the children doing this, they go from house to house, and by the time they're done collecting all these soul cakes, they go ahead to the church and offer up a prayer for every request. Oh, Saint so-and-so, please intercede for this person here. They're having a hard time here. Oh, Saint so-and-so, can you intercede for that? That's what they did every year. That's where the origin of, dressing up had come from. It came from that. That's not no pagan origin. That's a Christian origin that was later paganized by crazy rumors. So when you see people dressing up, that is of Christian origin. Therefore, dressing up for Halloween, is not pagan. Now, if you want to go ahead and dress up as a demon or something like that, or someone or something other than a saint, that's pagan, right? Of recent pagan origin. But now you can't sit up here and say, oh, well, you know what? You're dressing up for Halloween. Oh, that's pagan. No, that was something that the Christians did first, and the pagans adopted later. This took many forms that varied by region, but this practice of guising or mumming was part of celebratory folk practices at other times of year, particularly Christmas. Now, ain't that something? So this just didn't happen on All Hallows Eve. People continue to do this during times of Christmas. Once again, this is not looking good the more we just look at history itself. In some places, the practice meant any geyser could enter a house and had to be welcomed and given soul cakes, while the owners pretended not to know who the visitors were. This is why traditional geysers masks were designed larger to hide someone's identity from the neighbors rather than the modern version of the Halloween costume. In some versions, and this is probably later, right? Because I'm going to get into why this is probably later. In some versions, the geysers simply painted their faces black. The gang consisted of people in a close-knit community pretending not to know who each other were while breaking social norms. This sounds nothing like food for a prayer that you find among Christians, which leads to our next issue that shows the origin of such trickery. Now, the following is a snippet from perfectdoolithday.com. Okay, this is a guy that lives in the UK, and this is what this guy says. He says, quote, "Do you remember Fox Night?" Now, we're going to get into Fox Night, but I just want you to hear what this guy says. His name is Barrett Chase. He says, in Britain, on November 4th is Fox Night. But in Duluth in the 1970s and 80s, the night before Halloween was Fox Night, right? It was a warm-up for Halloween with no costumes and no candy. Oh, really? Instead, it focused entirely on vandalism and mischief. I've talked to plenty of people about this, and for the most part, people don't know what I'm talking about. The people who grew up in a certain time, in a certain area and places know it all too well. And it's interesting to think about what had happened. How did Guy Fawkes Night make its way into the Midwest to change its date and alter its name for this brief period of time? Duluth was not alone in this celebration, if you can call it that. Wikipedia calls it Mischief Night and pins it down to a primarily East Coast phenomenon with roots reaching back to the 18th century. It lists many alternative names, but does not mention Fox Night. It mentions Hacker's Night, Goosey Night, Cabbage Night, Gate Night, Mat Night, Devil's Night. What day is Devil's Night? October 30th, during the same time of what's called All Hallows Eve or Halloween. It's called Fox Night or Demon Night. Now you tell me, does this have a pagan origin? Does Demon's Night have a pagan origin? No, it does not. It has another origin, and I'll show it to you. And it's not Christian. Here it is. We're going to continue this. Mischievous Night, Miggy Night, Tic Tac Night, Corn Night, Trick Night, Mickey Night, Cabbage Stock Night, Mizzy Night. In 2003, a bunch of PDDers brought back an adult version of Fox Night, which was basically bar hopping while acting like a jerk. If memory serves, it involved a lot of duct tape and firecrackers. So, what are your memories of Fox Night? Did you participate? Were you ever toilet papered, egged, or soaped when it came there? When did it originate? When did it end? Now, here's the thing. This is a part that I did not get to go ahead and put in this presentation, but I'll give it to you anyway. Fox Night, based on a guy named Guy Fawkes, was a Roman Catholic. Now, during his day, Roman Catholicism was pretty much illegal. Now, you could go ahead and get into the Anglican Church, which showed that anytime a ruler was Catholic, Protestantism was banned. Anytime a ruler was Protestant, Catholicism was banned. This is where you get the stories of Queen Mary of Scots, right? Bloody Mary. Why was she called Bloody Mary? Now you know why she was called Bloody Mary. Hey, I'm Mary. I'm a Catholic. I see I got a lot of Protestants in my area. I'm gonna go ahead and make that illegal because I'm gonna go ahead and purify my whole country of all this junk. So this is what happened. Now during this time, it was on the latter end for the Catholics. So whoever was in charge, I believe it was Parliament, just happened to basically make Catholicism illegal, right? You know, people were sneaking and trying to practice it and whatever. And so there was a guy named Guy Fawkes who got sick of it. Guy Fawkes tried to go ahead and blow up Parliament. There was something that he wanted to explode. And from this explosion would cause the death of people that were in power. And from there, he will hope that, his other Catholic freedom fighters will follow behind him. But the problem was what? What was the problem? The problem is that Guy Fawkes got caught. And so when those Protestants caught that Catholic dude trying to go ahead and do that bad stuff, they pretty much set him up on a firing wall, set him up on the wall, had those guys, aiming guns at him and say, hey, bro, you got any last words? And I don't know what his last words were, but of course, he had his eyes tied. And from there, he took them bullets. And that was on November 5th. And when that story came out, guess what the Protestants did? They decided that every November 5th, that they were going to go ahead, paint their faces black, disguise themselves in masks, make sure no one know who they were, and they were going to go around to all the Catholic folk that they knew and said, man, give me your money, give me your food, give me some cake, give me some beer, give me some wine, give me some this, give me some that. And that's what they did. And they called it Guy Fawkes Night. They called it Fox Night. And that this is a way of the Protestants putting salts on the Catholic wound. So they did this every single year. And these boys would cause ruckus throughout the UK in the 1800s or 1700s or whatever this was. So that whole November 5th thing, when people started to come over into America, they all of a sudden not only did it on November 5th, but some folks, for some reason, started to go ahead and carry that into the day before All Saints Day. They decided to go ahead and do it on October 30th. And it just was called other things, like Devil's Night. So now the whole reason why it began, Guy Fawkes, they ain't even doing it for that no more when it came into the Americas. They ain't even doing it because of that no more. Now it's just a chaotic night where people just go ahead and just, they basically purge it for that whole night. But that's where it came from. So what they call Devil's Night came from, something that, a Catholic and Protestant feud. And yet you see people dressing up to disguise themselves so that way they would not know who did it. That right there is the origin of, oh, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and dress up as Halloween and blah, blah, blah. Can you please give me some candy, trick or treats? That's the issue. But what did we just get done reading? We just get done reading that, when it came to the Christians in the 1200s, they ended up dressing up as saints. So it looks like they did a lot of treating. They didn't do no tricking. They dress up as saints. Why did they dress up as saints in the 1200s and earlier and all that? Because they were too poor to afford statues to do a procession around their churches to honor the saints on All Saints Evening and All Saints Day. So they dress up as saints themselves during the 1200s or earlier. And from there they went, remember we just got done saying that. Then from there they went house to house asking for soul cakes, and I'll go ahead and pray for whoever it is you want me to pray for, and so by the time they got like 8, 9, 10 soul cakes and some nuts and some berries or whatever, they went down to the church and they began to go ahead and pray. Saying so-and-so, can you bless this person? This person asked for this request here. Can you bless this person and that person? That's what they did. You can't get that mixed up with way later on when you had a Catholic and Protestant feud on November 5th that Protestants added salt to the Catholic wound on to the point where that went into the Americas and got pushed to, the day before All Saints Day and say, oh, that's pagan. No, it don't happen like that, Jack. So trick or treating, right? And all the rest of that stuff, that was of Christian origin. The Christians were the first to go ahead and not doing no tricking, but I guess you could say do a lot of treating and praying and indulgences and all that stuff. That's where that first started. But you can see how later on, because of some other events, that all of a sudden that was changed. So this is the reason why people cannot come into All Saints Evening and All Saints Day, right? Halloween and All Saints Day. They can't walk into it and say, oh, that's pagan. Oh, that's pagan. Oh, that's pagan. It's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. We've been doing this since the beginning. What's so pagan about what we're doing? Nothing. People would dress up as saints, ask for prayers, and they will hold prayers and things like that. What are you talking about? That's an issue. All right. Now it says here, this element delved into a misrule element. Again, something also seen at Christmas where acts of damage and violence were threatened, and minor acts carried out of the geysers were not rewarded with food. The clear line of descent from this to modern trick or treating is obvious. This is all the this that this all arose from a Christian practice of charity on a holy day is also clear through in places it was also involved leaving out food for the dead. Again, it is impossible to tell if this too was a pre-Reformation Christian practice or remnant of something pre-Christian. Geysers often carry vegetables carved with faces holding candles. Does this sound familiar to you? As lanterns as they went around house to house in their community. These would be turnips or mango wurzels, and this practice was common in Ireland, but also in northern Scotland and in parts of Somerset, where they were called punkies or spunkies. This was a dialect word for the phenomenon of ignited marsh gas, thought to be apparitions in the eastern England. These will-o'-the-wisps were referred to as jack-o'-lanterns. So, in other words, you see these type of light, these gases of light coming out these marshes. And when people saw that, they did not think that it was just some type of glowing steam. They thought that they were spirits. So this is where this is coming from. So far, this don't sound nothing like 150 AD, 300 AD, 400 AD, 9th century, 10th century. It don't sound nothing like that. Nothing. That's an issue. Let's keep going. This has given us the Irish by way of the United States modern version their name, though now made out of pumpkins. Again, the origin of the practice is obscure, and there is no way of knowing if it was a pre or post Christian tradition. Now, like I said, you ain't got nobody who was a Christian carving pumpkins out in the 1200s or the 9th century or earlier, or even the 1200s again, because that was the time during the death and plague. You ain't got nobody carving out pumpkins, going up to someone's door saying, oh yeah, we like to pray for you, but I got this scary pumpkin to scare you. That don't make no sense. I feel like that meme. You know what I mean? Anyway, all right, let's continue. Other traditional Halloween games and practices involve various norms of divination to predict the future regarding death, marriage, and children. Not surprisingly, Halloween games often involve apples, i.e., bobbing for apples. Now, don't a lot of people try to go ahead and trace that to a Roman tradition? But it's funny because I don't remember when the early Christians were coming together for All Martyrs Day to celebrate the death of all those who died in the faith. Right? I don't remember them ever saying, hey, y'all, let's go ahead and ball for some apples. No wonder we don't read that in early Christian practices up to this day. Anyway, not surprisingly, Halloween games often involve apples, i.e., bobbing for apples or nuts, given these were collected around this time of year. And that has to do with what? Harvest. But the most common modern Halloween traditions are a few Irish and Scottish practices that were transplanted in the United States and then really only became popularized after the Second World War. The influence of American popular culture and the commercial opportunities the modern American style festival provides to manufacturers of confectionery, toys, and costumes meant that these days the commercialized version of the holiday is now almost international. So, is it pagan? In short, short answer is no. Contrary to Seth Andrews' claims about, quote, the Catholic Church stealing a pagan festival involving the Druid priests and the people dressing up in masks and tricks and treats, the date and almost the traditions are firmly Christian in origin. The November 1st date is the center of the All Hallow Mass, was not derived from any Celtic original, and the original Irish date for an All Saints feast was moved from April 20th to November 1st. See, because if what they were saying was true, then you would see stuff that start out on November 1st from out the gate. But you don't see that, do you? No, you don't. We see it recently claimed in times of recent history, 1634 and onward somewhere. But when we look at the 9th, 10th century, 10th century, 4th century, 5th century manuscripts that have calendars and dates and things like that of when this took place, what do we find? April 20th for Ireland, who only celebrated 3 saints on that day. Unlike the other Christians from all around the rest of Europe who celebrated, All Saints, the Feast of All Saints. That's an issue. So we're coming up to the the latter end. This is basically the end. November 1st, due to the influence of a continental and English liturgical practice, this meant that the new All Saints Day fell on the quarter day of Samhain was pure coincidence. Contrary to repeated insistence in popular sources, scholars can find no clear indication of any ritual or religious practice on Samhain. And by the way, when you end up doing your research, you find that archaeologists are saying the same thing. They go up there, they start digging for bones and all that stuff. And yes, they do find people who were murdered and killed, but the problem is they don't know why they were murdered or killed. They don't know why. There's not enough evidence to say, you know what, this person died in battle, or you know what, this person died via a sacrifice. Like, there's not enough evidence. And then what makes it even worse is that half of the things that were written about people who were killed came from the Roman soldiers who went up there to do their thing. So archaeologists can't find nothing. The people who like to look at manuscripts, they can't read and find nothing. That's an issue. Anyway. All right. Contrary to repeated insistence in popular sources, scholars can find no clear indication of any ritual or religious practices on Samhain, and certainly none that can be traced to later Halloween traditions. Mask, costumes, trick-or-treating, Halloween games, etc. all either have known traditional Christian origins or simply cannot be linked to anything definitely pre-Christian. It's either this came from the Christians or we can't link it to any of this stuff that people are claiming. Oh, it came from back there. It came from paganism. We look back there, we ain't found nothing. Oh, well, we found something. Well, what did you find? Oh, you found Jeffrey Keating from 1634? Too late, bruh. We need primary sources. Oh, we looked at the primary sources. We didn't find anything. That's an issue. All have either known traditional Christian origins or simply cannot be linked to anything definitely pre-Christian. Possibly the main thing that does connect Halloween to earlier beliefs about Samhain is the idea that it is a numinous time of year when this world and the other world became closer, and thus it is a time, just a second, thus it is a time to be wary of malevolent entities. But how much of that idea comes from pre-Christian beliefs and how much of it is a result of a Christian feast focused on the afterlife and the dead is again impossible to tell. It is most likely some combination of the two. What is very clear is that anti-theistic activists like Seth Andrews simply do not care about the details, let alone the truth behind the popular claims about Halloween being pagan in origin and simply stolen by Christianity. Despite exhorting others to question everything and checking their facts, supposed rationalists like Andrews do not bother to practice what they preach if an idea fits neatly enough with their strong confirmation biases. And that is genuinely scary. Happy Halloween. Once again, that came from a website called called History for Atheists. And once again, this guy is an atheist who wrote this article. And again, you could check all this dude's sources. This dude then quoted calendars from calendars from England and the Celtic area that we don't even use these calendars no more. You know what I mean? This dude was quoting primary sources out the wazoo. Tons of them. So again, and you know what's funny? Before I had arranged this article, things like that, I went and copied and pasted all his sources, and yeah, they were hitting correctly. 9th century, 1st century BC, 10th century, like the stuff is correct. Every time this dude ended up citing a source, I copied and pasted, looked at the source, and I'm like, that he's a good sourceman. So he's making these claims based off what we actually find in history. So to wrap this up, all I gotta say is that when it comes to the date of November 1st, right? October 31st, October 30th, you find that in Ireland, they celebrated All Saints' Day on April 20th. You find Polycarp being celebrated on April 20th. And Polycarp wasn't even from Ireland. He was from the South. He was from Jerusalem and Rome and all them areas. Then after that, we find in 270 AD, we find that, okay, people are celebrating this thing in May. Then later on, we find that people pushed it to November. And then we found out why. Because if you're going to have a lot of people migrating into Rome and Jerusalem and all that, and you ain't got no way to feed these people and they starving, then and they say that's the reason why they moved it. They moved it to the time when a harvest hit, when you have more food than ever, to go ahead and have all these people come down from different countries to celebrate it. That's the reason why they moved it. That goes against the idea that the Christians were trying to go ahead and move in on a pagan Samhain to try to get in. That goes against that narrative because they're telling you why they moved it. Then when we get to the practices, right, which is what? Saying prayers for the dead. Well, once again, you find the reason why they did that had a lot to do with indulgences eventually. And of course, it had a lot to do with the time of the plague. By the time the plague hit in the 1300s, yeah, you better believe you're praying for your dead. They went from door to door, having things like soul cakes. That is of Christian origin. People dress up as saints and march around the church to go ahead and celebrate All Saints Day, followed by going door to door, getting some soul cakes for exchange for prayers and things like that. And like that's so this is what we find. I find a lot of treating. I find no tricking. It seemed like trick or treat. Where did that come from? That now we got to jump further on. That came from the origins of what people call Guy Fawkes Day, right? Guy Fawkes wanted to go. He was a Catholic. Wanted to go and do something bad to the Protestants to get them out of power, so that way all this Catholic oppression, oppression of the Catholics could stop. What happened? The dude got caught. He got shot. The Protestants put salt in the wound by going ahead every November 5th and going door to door, dress up so that way no one would know who they were, to go ahead and steal from the Catholics every year. Give me some cake. Give me some beer. Give me this. Give me that. That went over into the Americas later known as Demon Night. So it seems like the tricking came from something political and was turned into something that the pagans was like, oh, okay, we could do mischief too. How about we go ahead and start doing some human sacrifices and some curses and this and that. So it seems like, that the devil's night came in out of something that was going on between Protestant and Catholics. So that was the tricking. The treating seemed like it came from somewhere way earlier. And all of a sudden, now we got what? Trick or treat. Dressing up, all that. So, with that being said, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and end this. So, yeah, I'm just going to end this. And I'm going to go ahead and go live again sometime. I don't know when, but yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and go live again sometime so that way I could go ahead and answer y'all's questions. Because right now I know that I got to go ahead and be at work in about an hour. But what I will do is I will at least read what I have here as some comments here. So I'm gonna go ahead and read these comments, and from there. And by the way, I left the links for this stuff here in the description section. But unfortunately, I didn't leave all my links there. I couldn't gather that stuff in enough time. But let's just say I had a whole plethora of stuff that I was coming from. All right, did Yeshua celebrate Halloween or anyone in the New Testament? No, because there was no plethora of martyrs during that time. The only martyr that was around was Stephen in Acts chapter 7. He was like the first martyr. So yeah, no, there'd be no reason. You gotta remember, All Martyrs Day was celebrated because there were so many people dying for the faith that they're like, look, we need to celebrate this. So no, Jesus did not celebrate folks because nobody dying for him yet. And during the New Testament, uh, there definitely wasn't nowhere near enough near as much people that died during that first century as by the time you get to the second and the third. So that would be the reason why not. You can't celebrate nothing if you ain't got a lot of people that died yet. That makes sense. I thought it did. Now I do know that it does say Paul wrote in the epistle to the Romans, during the first century, he did say, "Give honor to where honor is due, and to the saints give double honor." So I guess the Christians later on picked up that passage and they were like, "Yep, we could definitely do that," and they did. All right. Let's see. But this is just other people's observances. Well, again, observances of what? Observances of past actions, right? We look at the past actions and we compare that with what people claim today. If that don't add up, then people might want to go ahead and re-examine their claim based on what we're observing in the past, right? If I say pancakes was invented in the first century and I keep on finding pizza, but yet I find pancakes during the time when the UNESCO festival or whatever was going on in the 1800s in America, then I got to say it came from America. I can't say it came from Italy. They was making pizza. They wasn't making pancakes. Well, it's flat and round like a pizza, bruh. So it kind of, nah, bruh. uh-uh. Stop it. Stop it. All right. Next one. What have you observed aside from other people's accounting? What have I observed? I've only observed people celebrating Halloween in the way that I've seen it ever since I was a kid. I've always observed people dressing up as whatever and going house to house and getting a bunch of candy. That's what I observed. I was born on April 11th, 1984. So, next one. I want to hear your words from your experience. What has been revealed to you? From my experience, I experienced Halloween the way that it was described in this article, in the modern way. That's been my experience. Now, other things that my church would do, the Trinity Church I used to go to as a kid, we would have something called "Hallowed Be Thy Name" party. So we would dress up. Get this, we would dress up as Bible characters, and from there we celebrate and things like that. We dress up as Bible characters. We talk about Samson. We talk about David and all that. And from there, we were giving candy. And this was all in our church. Now I think it's interesting that that's we're kind of, in some sense, we was kind of continuing the Christian tradition of dressing up as saints. The only difference is we didn't go door to door saying, hey, you know what, and sing you a song or something like that, or, ask for a soul cake. And from there, you tell me who you want me to pray for, and I'll go over to church and I'll definitely pray for the departed there to a saint. We didn't do all that. But I think it's interesting that, you have some kind of Christian origin there. I kind of think about that. Let me see. What has been revealed to me? Well, what's been revealed to me is, my research I've done here, that I want to know the truth about these claims. Will you be willing to watch it from the Hebrew roots, guys? I watched. They do give references, yes or no? Of course. Because this is the only way where I could test, like, okay, these claims seem to be of recent origin. I want to see what, recent origins that people dig out from. If these dudes start quoting books that came out in the 1950s and 60s and 40s and 30s and 20s, and they're quoting all these books and whatever, and these books came from the 1800s that tout out all this stuff, then it'll go to show that what I'm reading is true. What they would have to do is they would have to quote a primary source that says what they say. That's what they're going to have to do. They can't quote a secondary source that just has the claim. No, Jack, you got to quote a primary source. Give me an Irish calendar. Give me an English calendar. Give me a Frankish calendar that says something like this. Or give me an account. We already showed that, you had monks that wrote about Samhain, but the problem is they didn't write the stuff that people are writing today. That's the problem. And these Christian monks are basically the descendants of these people. Now, of course, the reason why, you don't find nothing about Samhain is because the Druids were strictly like oral in their tradition and religion. So that's why you don't find nothing. These people ain't writing nothing. It was their later ancestors who became monks who finally started writing down something. But even then, when they wrote down stuff, they're too preoccupied talking about how Christ ruled over everything and this and that. So the stuff that they do mention about Samhain, like, they don't mention anything ritual sacrificial. They mention stuff that's supernatural, like, the spirits and things like that of fairies and stuff and elves and all that were warded off by the Christians and the saints. Where's the sacrifice? Where's the human sacrifice and this and that and to appease the gods and this and that and don't scare it? Like, where is that at? That's a problem. So, let's see. I also want you to look up Dia de Muertos and see what they do. All right, I most definitely will. And with that being said, it is now 4:06. I gotta go in and get up, y'all. But you best believe that during the work day, I'm definitely gonna be looking this up on my phone. Dia de Muertos. I'm gonna be looking up any Hebrew roots people who say this stuff. I'll be looking up, seeing what they say, and if they're saying anything What I'm confirming, I swear, I'm clipping it and I'm be like, see y'all, I told y'all, look at what he just said. Other than that, God bless y'all. And happy All Saints evening. Happy All Saints Day. Christos Aneste. Christ is risen.